This podcast is brought to you by People's Food Co-op, a community-owned grocery store in downtown La Crosse, Wisconsin and Rochester, Minnesota, that promotes local farmers and producers through an emphasis on fresh, healthy, sustainable food. Anyone can shop. Everyone is welcome. For more information, visit them online at pfc.coop. This podcast is also brought to you by Trempealeau County Tourism. Whether your idea of fun is bicycling, hiking, or canoeing, afterwards head into the heart of one of their welcoming communities to experience historic architecture, independent shops, and locally owned dining establishments. Visit Trempealeau County Tourism online. The Great River Shakespeare Festival is running now through July 31st, featuring Twelfth Night, and the African Company presents Richard III and more at Minnesota's premier Shakespeare Festival in Winona, Minnesota. Buy tickets online at grsf.org. Great River, great drama. On this episode, we talked with Doug Scholz-Carlson, Artistic Director at Great River Shakespeare Festival. We touch on the language of Shakespeare, bringing the event back from COVID, upcoming performances, and what is next for this amazing festival in Winona, Minnesota. You can find more conversations, food reviews, live music, and events on our website, lacrosselocal.com. I'm Amy.
And I'm Brent.
And this is La Crosse Local.
I'm Doug Scholz-Carlson. I was actually born in Ann Arbor, Michigan, but I lived most of my life in Minnesota. I grew up in Northfield. My father was a professor at St. Olaf College, and I went there. So, boy, I got into Shakespeare, well, I guess a little bit in college. It was mostly in grad school. I went to grad school as an actor. That was where, when we were working as an actor, started to really dive into the language, really understand what the language was and how it worked. And that I got fascinated with that. I did 3 seasons at the Utah Shakespeare Festival, which is one of the biggest Shakespeare festivals in the country. And then when I moved back to Minnesota, I founded my own company called Minnesota Shakespeare Project. We would take short productions of Shakespeare plays around to rural Minnesota, and we performed at community centers and schools and all kinds of things. When Great River Shakespeare Festival was being founded, I knew one of the founders from the Utah Shakespeare Festival. He invited me to be part of the acting company, and then it sort of went from there.
Some for me, which you kind of just mentioned, it's the language. To me, it is like almost a different language. Is it something for you that just kind of snap? How can people go about kind of experience Shakespeare a little bit better? I know that's kind of a barrier for people.
Yeah, I know the language can potentially be a barrier for people. I think it's really interesting. It is less of a barrier for young people. I think for kids, find it as less of a barrier because young people, they're acquiring language still. So they are used to getting the meaning of words from the context. And that's really what the plays were written to do, that in Shakespeare's time, the English language is just sort of coming together. So there are all of these words that came into the English language for the first time, or their first recorded use was in a play by Shakespeare. So the audience was also, they were hearing words that they didn't recognize. For instance, in the play Macbeth, Macbeth calls the murder of Duncan an assassination. And we all know what the word assassination meant, but Shakespeare's audience, that was a brand new word. It didn't exist in the English language. So they had to figure that out from the context. I think if you're playful with language, if you're interested in language, then Shakespeare's plays become really fascinating because he is constantly playing with language. And the people that really play with language the most are young people. I mean, teenagers are constantly playing with language. They are constantly shortening words, combining words together, using words in different ways. And it's all a means of creating a language that grownups don't necessarily understand. So the slang, it's part of being the in-group is that you use certain kinds of language. And in Shakespeare, there are characters that are doing that as well. You think of like hip hop artists and spoken word artists are always playing with language. And that's probably the modern sort of inheritor of what Shakespeare's doing. So if you're fascinated with language, then I think that's where you get really fascinated with Shakespeare, because the language is beautiful and evocative and it expresses things in really concise ways. I know sometimes it feels like the language is really long, but in a lot of ways it's expressing things in really very concise ways. And if you're fascinated with that, then you'll get fascinated with Shakespeare.
That kind of, just like you said, it draws parallels to music in a way, because, I'm always a person who rarely listens to the words. But like you said, the words in some ways are made up or they're kind of changed or fixed to rhyme with, a previous word. It's kind of interesting when you think about it that way.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, in Shakespeare, the way you're constructing language, that sometimes you're sort of meeting a rhetorical form, that you are using language in a particular way. So the sound of the language means as much as the actual meaning of the words. And I think for us, the way we're taught to write in school is we're taught to write and we're taught to speak really based on the meaning of the individual words. So you're trying to create meaning, and then we take out all the words that we don't need, and we express it in the shortest way possible. But it's also interesting to use language in a rhetorical form. And to give just one example of sort of a modern version of this, in Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech, you can look at the notes of his speech, and you'll see that when he gets to that "I have a dream that," when he gets to that rhetorical form, which he says over and over and over again, in his notes for the speech, he only has it about 3 different things that he was going to say. But when he was giving the speech, then he realized that he'd hit a rhythm. Like he realized he hit something that the crowd found meaningful. So he kept saying it, "I have a dream that," and then it kept going. And in trying to meet the rhetorical form, then he actually said things that he hadn't planned to say. And that's some of the most interesting stuff that he'll say, is that sometimes when we're speaking in a rhetorical form and we're just trying to speak in that form, we express an inner truth that we didn't even realize that we had to express. And that, again, is one of the fascinating things about Shakespeare, is that the characters get going, and because they're speaking in this form, because they're speaking, they actually express the inner truth that they never really knew that they were going to express.
I never really thought about it like that. So, I mean, just kind of looking at your passion for Shakespeare, you being the artistic director for the Great River Shakespeare Festival, what has been the process like bringing it back? I know you referenced, I got a little bio about you, about sitting on your couch for 2 years. What has it been like? What has the feeling been like to bring it back?
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, we talk about theater all the time. Like, there is something different about being together with other people and experiencing a story. If you're in community and you experience a story, you see the reactions of the people around you. So we all know that, like, if you're watching something together, you laugh a lot more. It's a lot funnier. You're moved by it a lot more deeply emotionally. And that happens because there's other people around you experiencing it. And the other thing that happens when there's other people around you experiencing it is sometimes they have a very different reaction. You'll be sitting there, you'll see something, you don't laugh at it because you didn't think it was funny. And everybody around you laughs, and you go, I wonder what that experience was. It gives you insight into how other people see the world, or other people are having a strong emotional reaction and you're not. And you realize, oh, I see the world differently. So you get 2 different kinds of things. Either, like, when you see a story and you're experiencing it together with people, either you see yourself in the story being told, and then you feel a kind of community because you realize, oh, I'm not alone in the universe. Like, oh, that's exactly what it feels like to fall in love. Like, I know that feeling, and other people know that feeling too. So you feel this sense of community, or you don't see yourself in it. And then you gain a sense of empathy, because you're like, I want to understand the world through someone else's eyes. So to be deprived of that experience for 2 years, because we have been getting stories, we've been watching Netflix, we've been watching, everything from Tiger King to, whatever all we've been watching, like as a community, as a nation, as a people, like we've been watching these stories together, but we haven't been doing it at the same time. And that's a really different experience. So the process, I know that, like, I'm answering a very philosophical question when you're asking a very practical one, but the process of bringing it back has been really interesting because we're not used to being in the room together. We're not used to being in that kind of community. So as we've come back together as a company, to a certain extent last summer, and then even more, in a more intense way this summer, it's been really interesting just to see how we've changed, how we see the world differently, how we communicate differently, how we work together in the room, and how we tell the stories.
Digging through your season for this year, you touched on what people can expect when they're in it, but also, like, are shows a little heavier? Are shows a little lighter? Is there some stripped down versions of it? Like, what can people expect that way? Are there different venues?
A little bit of a mix. We're back in our main theater in the Performing Arts Center on the campus of Winona State University. So we're really happy to be back in that theater. It's a great theater for everybody to be together. You can hear really well in there. You can see, there's not a bad seat in that house. So it's terrific to be back in that space. And the season's a little bit of a mix. 12th Night is just a joyful, fun, goofy story. It's one of Shakespeare's funniest plays. It's moving. People fall in love. It's just a romp. Like, it's a really, really fun story. We're also doing Always Patsy Cline, which is a little bit of a departure for us in terms of pieces that we'll do. I think Patsy Cline has been called the Shakespeare of country music. I don't know if that's actually true or not, but, it's great, great American music. And that show is just, it's 26 songs and then a very funny sort of monologue that kind of holds the whole thing together. So again, that will just be a great experience in the theater to come in and laugh, enjoy the music, hear some songs that are really familiar, and it'll be really fun. And then African Company is, probably our more serious offering of the season. Although I have to say, it's surprising how funny that show is. Carlisle Brown is a playwright from Minnesota. He's he's internationally known playwright, one of the most prominent playwrights probably ever to come out of Minnesota. And this is, in a lot of ways, his most famous play. So it tells the story of, in 1820, there was this company of Black actors, some free slaves, and then other people that had come to New York City, and they were putting on this production of Richard III. And there's a white company that was also putting on a production of Richard III, and the competition between those companies, the white company trying to shut down the Black company. But it's a really beautiful story about who owns these stories, who gets to tell these stories, how do we get to tell these stories? What does Shakespeare mean kind of culturally for us? It's a terrific piece and another really beautiful language piece.
So kind of digging into, you have experience as a director, a fight choreographer, actor, and also a certified intimacy director. So how does it affect your approach to Shakespeare? I mean, you're coming at it at so many different angles, right?
Yeah, I started my training as an actor, and I do think that is one of the best places to start if you're going to work on Shakespeare, because it's so much an actor's medium. The way the language works is going to control kind of what happens in the plays. So to really get into the nuts and bolts of actually speaking that language is a great place to start. I kind of always knew that I wanted to be a director because just the way my head works, I like seeing that bigger picture. I like putting the plays together. I really like being able to create the way the room rehearses, which you really get to do if you are the director of the piece. And then my work has really kind of spread out. Actually, fight choreographer kind of came somewhere in the middle. Being a fight choreographer is the thing that kind of led me into directing. And then intimacy direction is the latest piece that I've added. As a fight choreographer, there's a whole movement to keep actors more physically safe. I think a long time ago, we didn't worry that much about the physical safety of actors while they were performing. And then with fight choreography, we start to pay more and more attention to that so people don't get injured. Intimacy direction is really taking care of the emotional health of actors. So the difficult moments that people are going through, and then specifically moments of intimacy, which can be, they can be a lot of fun to perform on stage. They can also be really challenging emotionally to perform on stage, to have somebody who is specifically there to choreograph those moments and help people through the emotional journey that they as a human being have to go through when they are trying to portray these other people. They're all kind of different ways of approaching the work. And I certainly really like being able to look at it with all those different angles. And I think it leads to richer work.
I'm sure there's, with this festival being basically months long in some sense, was there one thing that you're specifically most excited for this year, either a show or even just an experience you had?
I don't know. There's lots of things. I mean, just the coming back together and the whole process of that is really exciting. I am really excited for the Community Engage project that we are doing at the end of the season. That's a new thing for us. It's a project that we've been working on for about 3-4 years now. The Community Engage project is where a professional company will come in. We did story circles. So we went to people in Winona and we just encouraged them to tell stories. And we did that for a matter of years, gathered all these stories together. And then we have a playwright who takes all the stories that people told and craft that into a play. So it's a play that is about the community. It really comes from the community. And we had no idea the kind of issues that we were going to get into. I think the play, in the end, we now have a script for it. We're just about to go into rehearsal for it. The play really is about belonging, I think, and what it means to belong in a community, and who belongs and who doesn't belong, and the different experiences that people have in this community of belonging or not belonging. That takes you into issues of race and gender and, kind of all of the complicated societal issues that we have going on right now. But really it comes down to, stories of actual people in Winona. And it'll be performed by people from Winona as well. And I'm just really excited to see that play get on its feet.
That's interesting. I think there's something special about Winona in a sense of, the people there. I actually went to college there for my undergrad. But it just seems like there's different festivals, different events. It's not surprising that would be putting something together like that.
Yeah, it's kind of a remarkable community. Like, as I say, I grew up in Minnesota, but I hadn't really spent any time in Winona or in this region. And this region is really fascinating. I mean, you find an example of anything. the stained glass windows that are going on. When we were looking for a couple of years ago, we were looking for a hurdy-gurdy player, which is a Renaissance instrument. And it happened to be that one of the best hurdy-gurdy players in the country happened to live in Winona. And we're just kind of, we had a character that spoke Welsh in one of the plays. And then we found somebody who was a native Welsh speaker living in Winona. Like, it's such an amazing community.
So what's next for the festival? Do you see anything coming down the road or for yourself in particular? Anything that's you're excited for?
Yeah, I think you mean in terms of future seasons and things like that.
Yeah.
I think, to be honest, I do think there is a little bit of a process of rebuilding the audience and rediscovering what we are. A thing like a Shakespeare festival is, because we're a destination that people are traveling to go and see, we're part of people's regular summer plans. But over the last couple of years, everybody's plans have been kind of upended. Like, everything changes and lots of things have changed in society, what people want out of their vacations, sort of everything changes. So I think it's going to be a process of discovery for us to see, what does that mean for us in the future? Because we're not going to be the same thing in the future that we were in the past. We'll continue to do great plays. We will continue to, explore meaningful questions for the community. We'll continue to attract great theater artists from around the country. Like, we'll keep on doing all of that. But what form that actually takes, I'm really curious to see what that's going to mean in future years.
And also, I think it's just great, the different opportunities to see a show. This event has been going since June, and it's going through July 31st. Winona, people check out grsf.org.
Yeah, and people should know that there's all kinds of great ways to get tickets. If there are financial barriers, there are lots of ways to get tickets. We have discounts, we have all kinds of stuff. And then we have other events going on, and the community has lots of other events going on. So it's really worth, traveling up to Winona, spending the weekend, checking out the new restaurants, seeing some plays. It's a good time.
La Crosse Local Podcast is a production of River Travel Media. Do you have an interview idea you'd like to share with us? Message us on Facebook at La Crosse Local. Find out more about us at lacrosselocal.com, and you can subscribe to the La Crosse Local Podcast on your favorite podcast app. If you like us, rate us 5 stars. We appreciate it.